Hello again, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Trevor Price, and I'm here today to help you discover the differences between writing essays and writing reports. I've had a lot of questions from students in my classes, my colleagues, students, and other students I meet at university, asking me, what is the difference, and can you help me write reports and essays, please? We're very confused about what we should do. So whenever you're writing assignments, think about three things first. Think about your subject, think about the purpose of the assignment, and think about your audience. Because one of those things at least will give you an indication of whether you should write a report or an essay as your response to that task. So typically, science type subjects, mathematical, engineering, medical type subjects will usually require you to write a report. Whereas if you're doing something like history or the arts, then typically, or the law perhaps, they are going to ask you for essays. Your audience might specify what exactly they want from you, whether it's a report or an essay style piece of work. And also perhaps the purpose of your work. Whether you're trying to analyze and evaluate something, then perhaps a report is more aligned to helping you achieve that purpose. If you're describing the life of somebody, for example, in a kind of autobiography or a biography or an obituary or something like that, then necessarily an essay would be better. So what's the difference then specifically? Let's think firstly about the type of things that you'll find in a report or an essay and compare the two. So firstly, table of contents. In an essay, you wouldn't have a table of contents. A table of contents, for those who don't know, are a list of all the headings and subheadings in your written work with the page numbers linked to them, so you can find your way and navigate through your work in that way. A report would have that table of contents at the beginning. Like I say, an essay wouldn't. And because you have that table of contents in a report would need those headings and subheadings with page numbers. So the table of contents picks up those headings and subheadings from throughout your report and links it to the associated page numbers in the table of contents. So the reader can look at the table of contents and very clearly see, oh, that section is on that page, and move to that page very quickly. In an essay, you don't do that. You don't have a table of contents because your essay would not typically be split into sections with headings and subheadings in them. Essays are usually used in sort of academic type contexts, but also newspapers, especially these sort of glossy magazines that come with the newspapers at weekends, and I'm talking about the paper physical newspapers. If you buy one of those at the weekend and you have a look at it and you look at the magazines, those articles in magazines, especially the longer articles, are usually in the form of essays. Reports, meanwhile, are used for other sort of professionals in business, in the medical industry, consulting, engineering, science-based work professionals who are using those reports in their work. Essays also kind of focus on the analysis of theories and things and people. Like I say, Sunday magazines, there might be an essay there about somebody's life. There might be an essay there about some art that is in an exhibition around the world, for example. Whereas a report typically analyzes and presents primary data, so that's unique data to the author of that report. That data hasn't been perhaps published anywhere else, and you're going to find it in the report. Like I say, reports are typically used for scientific, engineering, medical, mathematical based work. Essays are more for descriptive analysis of theories and secondary research and people's ideas. A report will describe the methods used to collect the data that the author has used, whereas an essay will not go into any of the details of how the author has gone about and collected the information that they're writing about. A report will then take that data and that criticality of the methods and analyse and discuss the findings from that data and suggest perhaps improvements that can be made of the status quo. And perhaps at the end of a report, recommendations would be made by the author about what should happen to improve the situation in the future. In an essay, those methods wouldn't be included, and there'd be typically no reflection upon the actual process used for doing the research that has gone into building that essay. And quite often there's no recommendations made in an essay at all. In a report, you would have a clear structure. You would have, to begin with, a table of contents that has the number of each section and subsection, its title and its page number linked to it. You'd then follow that typically with an executive summary, or perhaps an abstract, it might be called, of the work of the whole report. Then you'd have an introduction. Then perhaps you'd have a literature review, or the context to the work. You'd then have a section called methodology that would describe the methods used to collect the data and analyse the data, and be a professional reflection upon that methodology used to critique the author's own methodology to see if there, upon reflection, were any improvements that could be made, or any consequences of the decisions made in that methodology that affect, therefore, the end results. Then you'd have the results of the research in the report, and then you'd have a section that's discussing and analysing, evaluating, interpreting the data that is presented. You'd then end the report with conclusions, followed by recommendations if required, and perhaps you might have some appendices at the end of the report with a list of references used throughout the report, and the appendices would hold information and data that isn't required in the main report, but would, if the reader wants to go and find more details, be available for the reader to try and enable the reader to understand some of the nitty-gritty detail of what the author's been talking about in the main sections of the report. Appendices aren't always necessary and might never be read by the readers. Whereas in an essay, the structure would be very different. So an essay normally has an introduction. It sets the context and the background of the work. Then you would follow that by the main body of the essay, and this main body would be divided into paragraphs of continuous flowing text. So you wouldn't have a section by section structure in an essay. You have the paragraphs that have nice flowing text, nice flowing narrative or prose of continuous flow. So the reader would not be interrupted by headings and subheadings and things like that. Following on from that and coming to the end of an essay, you would have some conclusions. So those would be the summary of the main parts of the work that's been written about previous to that. But here you would be careful to avoid adding any new information. That is not typically required in an essay. Especially in the conclusion, you do not add new information. In an essay, you might end with a bibliography, which is a list of suggested further reading. A bibliography does not contain necessarily the references you've used in your essay, because an essay wouldn't normally have references in it. Although if you're doing your an essay for academic purposes, you might be required to put a list of references at the end. But if you look at something like a magazine from a newspaper, they don't include the references in there. So that sort of professional essay that you see in the media doesn't typically have references in there, but an academic essay in an academic journal or for an academic piece of work, then you might be required to do that. So that links back to what I said at the beginning. Always check with your audience, always check the purpose and the subject of your written work, and to make sure that you are along the right lines and hitting the mark and doing well. I'm sure you can do it. If you've liked this YouTube movie, please, if you could click thumbs up in the link below and subscribe to the channel. You'll be able to know when I publish more videos to help you students at university. So thanks very much for watching. Bye for now.